I'm Paul Pribbenow, the president of Augsburg. It's my great privilege to welcome you to the 2011 meeting of the Augsburg College Corporation. For those of us who were at the church-wide assembly this past August in Orlando, we're reminded that our colleges have actually each chosen different ways of being governed. My four colleagues at the sister institutions who choose to be governed by the church-wide, of course, get up and offer up their quick whatever amendments to bylaws and their regions, and then they hope that all the delegates will vote for them, and it's actually gets to be kind of a joke because you get to about the fourth college and they get a few votes against their slate for some reason. No clear reason, but I think it's just in the principle of things. But as you know, Augsburg made a decision at the time of the merger to be governed by the four synods, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Southeast Minnesota, and Northwest Synod of Wisconsin, and it is our great privilege and blessing to have you connected to our work, and this annual meeting is certainly one way that we lift up those relationships, which I know are abiding and go on throughout the year, but in this very important way that you come together to help us to care for this remarkable institution. I wonder if you might join me in an opening prayer. The Lord be with you. Eternal God, bless all schools, colleges, and universities, especially Augsburg College, that they may be lively places for sound learning, new discovery, and the pursuit of wisdom. And grant that those who teach and those who learn may find you to be the source of all truth, through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen. Well, we're going to spend our first hour or so this morning exploring some of the ways in which we have begun to think here about the deepening connections between Augsburg as a college of the church and the other expressions of the church that you represent, the congregations, the synods, in fact also some of our sister institutions like the Fairview Hospital and Lutheran Social Service, the seminary. This has been a very important conversation for us, really now going back 5 years. This is the beginning of my 6th year as president here, and have engaged this conversation with our community really throughout the past 5 years, and it's been a rich conversation. It has led us to the creation of the Augsburg Center for Faith and Learning. It has led us to the appointment of Dr. Martha Stortz as the full Christensen professor following David Teedy in that role, and so it's been so valuable to us in many ways to think about how this has enriched our campus life, our community, and our connections to the church. What I'm going to do to start, though, is offer a bit of a framework for our conversations. We'll have a chance a bit later to hear about some of the very specific initiatives underway. But this is a presentation that I actually developed for a meeting this summer of representatives from our sister ELCA colleges and universities who have been coming to Augsburg now for 3 or 4 years each summer for an exploration of the vocation of Lutheran colleges and universities. And so I was asked to specifically to address questions that have to do with Augsburg, but I tried to take that opportunity to think broadly, to think theologically, but also pedagogically and in terms of institutional mission about how Augsburg imagines itself in its distinctive work as an expression of a faith community in the 21st century in our particular location and all of the other contextual pieces of our life. The piece was titled, as you see, Hospitality is Not Enough, the Claims of Justice in the Work of Our Colleges and Universities. And this is, from my perspective, one of the distinctive sort of purposes and focal points for our work. As you know, and you've come to these meetings regularly over the past several years, you know that this is a place of great welcoming, great hospitality, and that plays itself out in so many ways because of our location. But in particular, we have become a place that's very hospitable to students who have joined us, who come from communities of color, from first-generation families, who come from the city, and that's really changed the nature of our day-to-day life in some fundamental ways over the past 3 or 4 years as we've lived into our mission commitment to intentional diversity. And that hospitality that has led to that success and to that richness is very important to us. But one of the things that we've been now wrestling with, considering, exploring, is really the question of is hospitality enough? That is just the fact of welcoming them enough? Or in fact, is there a reason why they need to be welcomed that we need to worry about? And that's really where I'm trying to come to this. And I actually, what I found as I started to explore that question was, in fact, that Augsburg, of course, is a place that is both hospitable but also is very much dedicated to working in the world, sending our students, equipping our students to go out into the world to fight for justice, if you will, in the broadest sense of that word, for those who don't have access, who are vulnerable. And so that's really the broader question that I'm looking at here. I'm using a presentation style called Prezi. It's not PowerPoint, so be prepared for the screen moves a lot. So if you're prone to motion sickness, you might want to. We had a problem. I usually have a clicker that allows me to do it. We're not able to do that, so I'm going to stand here and just do this. But it is actually, the presentation is available, so if you are interested in this afterwards, you can get it on my webpage, so www.augsburg.edu/president/presentations. So that would, some people I know have enjoyed having a chance to look at it separately. So let me start with this claim. The actual theme of the conversation this summer was around civility. And for me, this concept of civility is so critical. As we rewrote the college's mission statement here last year, adopted a new mission statement just a year and a half ago, one of the things that it says in that mission statement, Augsburg College educates students to be, and the first outcome that we name is informed citizens. And that was a deliberate choice that the community made to list that. We also educate thoughtful stewards and critical thinkers and responsible leaders, but informed citizens was an important part. And I think it's a part of our legacy of preparing, equipping students to go out into the world, yes, for professions and jobs and careers in a variety of ways, but also to think about their role as citizens in a democracy. And so this claim of civility, of democracy in action became very important. And so I think in the current sort of context, you can certainly imagine then how critical this work is. I think all of us would agree that civility is not necessarily one of the highest values right now playing itself out in our day-to-day life in the world. So actually this focus on what I call the etiquette of democracy, which is really what civility is, and the work of a man named Stephen Carter, who teaches at Yale Law School, is an important part for me, of this work. And what Carter says is that civility is an attitude of respect, even love for our fellow citizens. It's a sum of the sacrifices we are called to make for the sake of living together. And the rules of civility are thus also rules of morality. And so in many ways, as we shape citizens, as we form citizens, we are teaching them, yes, vote, yes, get involved, but we're also teaching them the rules of living together and getting along with each other. And so taking that very seriously as a part of our day-to-day life here on campus, what we do with students as we send them out into the neighborhood and into the world, but also thinking about that as a part of our ultimate outcomes for an Augsburg education. So we looked at Stephen Carter's rules for democracy, and there are many. I just lift up a few here. Our duty to be civil toward others does not depend on whether we like them or not. That would be a good place to start. Civility requires that we sacrifice for strangers, not just for people we know. Civility has two parts: generosity even when it's costly, and trust even when there is risk. Civility creates not merely a negative duty, but an affirmative duty to do good. We must come into the presence of our fellow human beings with a sense of awe and gratitude. I love this one. Civility requires that we listen to others with knowledge of the possibility that they are right and we are wrong. Wouldn't that be significant? Civility requires resistance to the dominance of social life by the values of the marketplace. This is 7 or 8 out of his 12 or 13 rules. But I think you start to get a sense, again, and the beauty of the language here is that it actually links back to the liberal arts. It links back to kind of the spiritual and faith foundations, the moral foundations for our work. So very powerful work to think about, in fact, hospitality, yes, welcoming people in, but also civility calls us to the work of justice. Because the fact is we're not following these rules. We're not being courteous to each other in this broad sense that civility calls us to. So I think about that and the wonderful work of Letty Russell, of the late Letty Russell, who was a theologian, taught at Yale, and has this wonderful book called Just Hospitality. And so actually bringing the two concepts together was, I think, important. So it's the practice of God's welcome by reaching out across difference to participate in God's action, bringing justice and healing into the world. So very powerful to think about how there is a theological underpinning, if you will, for this connection between hospitality and justice. I then would turn our attention to then the way that claim comes to all of our Lutheran colleges, but certainly to Augsburg, and how does it shape our work in all fashions. I mean, we make this claim and this wonderful symbol. You've seen this symbol on things, and I just love to lift it up because it points to the fact that Augsburg links together 3 important aspects: the lamp of learning, the lamp of wisdom that is at the bottom of the circle, the city skyline, and then the cross, of course, overarching kind of concept there. So you get, even in our visual motto, you get, or symbol or mark, you get that connection between hospitality and the way that it links to learning, the way it links to our faith, and that critical integration of those in our life. And so in mission, in academic programs, in our common life, in our outreach, all of the forms in which this commitment to hospitality and justice need to be played out. As I mentioned, we did adopt a new mission statement just a year and a half ago, and it's important for us to keep seeing how, in fact, this commitment to hospitality and justice is grounded in this mission. So we educate students to be informed citizens, thoughtful stewards, critical thinkers, and responsible leaders. We do it in a community that is, in fact, engaged and committed to intentional diversity in its life and work. And we do it with certain principles, to excellence in the liberal arts and professional studies, to the faith and values of the Lutheran Church, and to the nature of our place in both urban settings as well as globally. And so very important conversations that led to this mission. We talked about this last year at our meeting, but important for you to know that we keep going back to this mission statement then as the foundation for this commitment to both hospitality and justice, and we do it as a college in the context of this mission. So just a couple words about Augsburg and the theological ideas behind this. Our original founding motto was, in fact, John 1:14, and the Word became flesh. It's out there on the wall outside. It's in Norwegian. And so maybe some of you can read that. But I think that that founding idea is more relevant than ever, if you will, both theologically. The Word does become flesh here in this college, in this neighborhood. But it's also practical. It then leads us to think about the various forms that carrying the Word into the midst of our neighborhood takes. I think that many of us would see that, in fact, this is a claim of God's ultimate act of hospitality. The Word came into the world. It became flesh. But at the same time, we learn from another part of that first chapter of John that it was rejected. And so, in many ways, again, it sets up that grounding of our calls to both hospitality and to justice. And I think this incarnational notion of this is so critical to, as a theological basis for thinking about the work of colleges. Our work is on the ground. It's in the classroom. It's in the residence halls. It's on the athletic fields. It's out in the neighborhood. But it's also, it's God's work. We're called to God's work, and we're called because that Word did become flesh, and then we are freed to be available to, as neighbor to others, freed for others. And that's critical part of this Lutheran heritage that we all share as the foundational pieces. So here at Augsburg, this, of course, historically has been a very interesting part of the conversation. As you know, Augsburg grew out of the Lutheran Free Church, which, if you know that part of the heritage of the Lutheran Church, this fascinating blend between Lutheran pietism and social responsibility that is really messy. But it is fun, yeah. But and you have to, you got to embrace that history, know that it's messy, see the good in it, as also the places where, in fact, it led us down paths that weren't particularly fruitful, I would say. And so I think it's important. We do claim that history, and we know that that has shaped us, that shaped our culture. At the same time, over the past 10 or 15 years, this community has done a great job of thinking through how, in fact, out of that history, we renew our commitment to these really incredibly important concepts of caritas, of civitas, and of civility, naming our place and naming how this place in the city, in fact, should shape the way that we love each other, that we love the world, the ways in which we live out the practices of citizenship in some sense. And so that serves as a foundation for our calling as a college that does embrace hospitality and justice at these intersections of faith, learning, and service. And that's a very important phrase that we've been using a lot to think about how we educate at the intersections of faith, learning, and service. And we've stated that, as many of you know, in this, well, I want to show you this quickly before I go to that. But I went back and we found Bernard Christensen's inaugural address, which was called The Word Became Flesh. So back in 1938, when he became the president, and he wrote that for those who have caught its spirit, Christianity does uphold the highest ideals for service and sacrifice on behalf of humans in the world. And you know, it really was with Christensen that commitment to the city started to be lived out in the 40s. You probably know that he served on Hubert Humphrey's Human Rights Commission in the city, and there were lots of examples of how he was trying to provide that leadership. You know, later in the 60s when Oscar Anderson was here and the work that Joel Torstenson and some of his colleagues did to really define our role in the city, and then the ways that that began to take shape in so many programs, Metro Urban Studies, social work, sociology programs, people like Gary Hesser, now Lars Christensen and Nancy Fisher. This tradition continues in very rich ways as a part of who we are. I then wrote just a couple years ago, you know, it's a little bit more flippant about it, but genuine hospitality offers mercy so that it might know the mercy that comes from engaged. If it was just about welcoming people, well, then we might as well just be a hotel. And that's the important thing. Again, hospitality is good. We care deeply about hospitality, but there needs to be something more there, and that's really the claim of justice that we celebrate. So it does serve as a foundation for our work. We have this statement of our vocation. We believe we are called to serve our neighbor, and think about that. That is faith, learning, and service linked all in those 8 words, and I think that's a very important part of who we are. So the hospitality takes lots of different forms for us, and I think this is critical as well, to get beyond the notion that hospitality is just how we greet people at the front door or the potluck supper in the basement. It's actually a broader claim on us, and here it's openness to the stranger, which is a critical part of our life, especially in this neighborhood, as we are faced each day with otherness and difference and religion and culture and background, and such a critical part of what our students experience. This wonderful passage from Laurel Dykstra, who is a Canadian theologian and educator, talks about prophets have no subtlety, no appreciation for the daily compromises. They can really make you look at your own life and upset your routine. Just think about that. I mean, that's what otherness does to us. And you know, in so many ways, that's at the heart of an authentic education, to be challenged with otherness so that you have to look at your own life. Very, very critical. We also want to emphasize the fact that this is important because you know, what colleges can get into, especially given their more transient nature of their community, they can get into lots of acts of service, and it's all good, you know, to do this. But we're trying to really help students to understand how this commitment to hospitality is a way of life. It's not random acts of kindness, it's a way of life. And so how we integrate it into their education generally, so that if they become an accountant or they become a teacher or a preacher or a social worker, whatever they choose to do in their life as their vocational journey unfolds, it includes this commitment as a part of that vocational journey. There's this wonderful passage, many of you know the book that Homans and Collins Pratt wrote about radical hospitality in the Benedictine sense. I love this passage. You know, at the monastery, we thought we were professional prayers. It's easy to pray for the world and God's people when you don't have to look into their tear-reddened eyes or fetch more toilet paper after Mass on Sunday. So the kind of messiness of being truly hospitable and having it be an integrated part of your life. It's also this notion that this is God's plan, that hospitality creates space, if you will, that others can come into to find their ways, to create that welcoming environment where people are allowed to find their own journey. There's a wonderful passage here from Henry Nouwen that many of you may know, that hospitality is the creation of free space where a stranger enters and becomes a friend instead of an enemy. Hospitality is not to change people, but to offer space where change can take place. A wonderful sense of what a college can do there. Paradox of hospitality is that it wants to create emptiness, not a fearful emptiness, but a friendly emptiness where strangers can enter, free to sing their own songs, speak their own languages, dance their own dances, and listen, here's a Catholic, free to leave and follow their own vocations. That's what this college does. We create the space for our students to find, discern their vocations, and then to leave and to follow them wherever that may lead them. What a powerful, powerful reminder of hospitality. And then also the notion that this is God's plan and that there is a horizon to this work. And this is so critical. Again, hospitality has to be seen as the first step in that broader claim, if you will, about what God's plan is for the world. What are God's intentions for those? This has been such a critical part of our work over this past 5 years, in particular, going back to the murder of our student 3 years ago this fall here in the neighborhood. As you remember, really the only Augsburg student that's ever been, or faculty member or staff member, been murdered in this neighborhood, and murdered while he was doing the good work of tutoring kids at a local community center. And this was a critical issue for our community to struggle with this, and then to think about what does that mean about who we are, and you know, how are we going to keep safe here, and all these issues. But one of the ways that we were able to change that conversation was to point to a wider arc. that arc of the moral universe of God's plan for the world that in fact is not necessarily just what happens tomorrow or next week, but in fact is what God intends for us and how we live into that. And that was such a powerful part of our experience. And so I always like to, if this comes up the way it's supposed to on this fancy presentation here, we'll get a chance to hear some important words in that regard. We're hooked into the...
I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, yes, sir, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because truth crushed earth will rise again. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yes, that scaffold sways the future. Yes. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Yes, how long? Not long. Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. Yes, he's trampling out the village where the grapes of wrath are stored. Yes, sir. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. Yes, his truth is marching on. Yes, sir. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Was putting this together, I made my kids watch that about 5 times, just so that we remember. People like this who inspired us to think about the work that we're about, and just certainly a powerful speech, but somebody who actually lived out that commitment and can inspire our students still. So let me talk specifically then about the work of justice in our college. There are 4 components of this, and I'm just going to talk about these quickly because these really then give you a sense of how we're thinking about this as a college. So first of all, there is at the core of this commitment to justice a vision of education that I call off the main road. I'm going to say a little bit about that in a second. The second piece of it is there's a vision of common life, that is life together, that is about co-creation, about being involved together in the work of creating our common life. Third, there is a vision of neighborhood well-being. For us here, that is a critical part of who we are, that there has to be in this education a sense of how we are neighbor in this place and other places where you find us. So colleges as anchors is actually the whole movement around this that we're working with. And then a vision of the world that is God's intentions for us. So for God so loved the world, sent his only son, and now he sends us. So that's really the kind of theological claim, again, that underpins so much of this work. So let me just say a quick word about each of these. So education off the main road, that's a phrase that I used actually after a trip to one of our global sites in Africa last fall, because I was sitting in a restaurant way up on a fancy restaurant way up on a hill overlooking Windhoek, Namibia, where our site has been for 16 years, and we had a whole day of visiting all of these just very tragic, horrendous places around the city that were villages of people who had moved in from they were tin villages. And so we'd seen a lot of misery and a lot of disease and a lot of poverty. But yet we were in this fancy restaurant looking out over the lights of the city. And actually one of the folks that was joining us for dinner said, what did you do today? And I explained what we had done. He said, it's good that you've been off the main road, because in Namibia, if you stayed on the main road, you wouldn't know what we're challenged with. And so in many ways that for me becomes a metaphor, if you will, of the kind of education that we offer at this college. We take students off the main road. And that's really the broader, so it's a curricular plan that takes them off the main road. And many of you have seen this. This is actually the college's curriculum depicted in this wonderful chart, which has the pieces that focus on engaging Minneapolis and Augsburg experience piece. It has the 2 courses on vocation that are the Search for Meaning courses. It has that liberal arts foundation across the curriculum. It has, of course, electives and major coursework, and then a keystone course that ties it all together. And I would say that this work is embedded in that curricular plan, this commitment to pedagogy, to teaching students, challenging them to think outside of the mainstream in many ways, and through the experiential side of this, in particular through the kind of courses that we teach. That's a very fundamental part of Augsburg's mission. There is also in this commitment to education off the main road a real experiential bias, and that's something this college has been known for really for at least 50 years, where we fit experience into our data, into the coursework that they take here in many ways, internships, service learning, just a whole variety of techniques. But the idea is that it is about learning, and we've got this wonderful statistic that we point to, which is that knowledge retention soars to 75% when it's practiced by doing, compared to retention of 20% when we learn simply by listening. There's not much to argue with there from my perspective. If we want students to learn, then why wouldn't we be injecting an experiential part into that, in fact, if that's the outcome that we can count on. There also here is in this curriculum a real commitment to an exposure to injustice, if you will, so that they're challenged to see the ways that the world isn't fair, and how you then link that to learning, and how you take what's called critical pedagogy. And this is the work, especially that our Center for Global Education has done so well. So they've got this whole circle of practice, and any of you who have been on one of their trips knows that this is how they look at things. You start with an experience, then you have reflection and analysis, you get new information out of that, you have new experiences, you then continue to reflect, and ultimately you take action. Ultimately, you evaluate and you come back to celebrating where you are, and it's all about this circle that really, if you've ever been on a CGE trip, you know this is how they teach. They dump you into the community. They do homestays. They take you to places that are just so shocking to, especially to our kind of American experiences, and then they use it to teach you, and they make it an important part of the ongoing educational practice. We also are a teaching and learning community that's marked by what Parker Palmer, a great educator and an Augsburg honorary degree winner of about 10 years ago, calls the grace of great things, which is this notion that when we come together, we invite diversity, we embrace ambiguity, we welcome creative conflict, we practice honesty, we have humility at our core, and we become free, again, freed. And so you see some of how this links back to the theological language that we talked about earlier. The second component of this is this notion of common life and co-creation, and this is such an important part. I really believe that one of the things that colleges and college communities do, of course, is that in their daily life they teach students how to treat each other, how to get along, how to solve their own problems. And so this idea of co-creation, how our students, faculty, staff are involved in the governance, if you will, the running, the day-to-day life of this campus is critical. It's about sharing power in many ways. That's a very important, of course there's a long tradition of that in higher education generally, but I think there's a bias specifically for Augsburg around this because, again, of our Lutheran free heritage that I think actually shapes this for us in many ways. Some wonderful examples of this that have begun to unfold. I was just at a session last night where we were talking, we put our enrollment center staff, which is where our students register and pay their bills and the like, and we went through a whole process with the entire staff last year where we put some coaches with them to help them work through ways that they would want to change how they do their work. So everything from how their space is organized, to the hours they keep, to how they can build better team efforts, and we let them solve their own problems. And that's really a very concrete example of co-creation, where we give them back both the privilege of doing that work, but also then the responsibility of coming up with solutions. And so very simple ways that we're trying to do this and trying to model this around campus. It actually comes to the work of something called Public Achievement, which is a program we have through our Center for Democracy and Citizenship. It's teaching the skills and habits that accompany and sustain a change in individuals from spectators to citizens. So how can we do that in our day-to-day life to help people move from being observers or spectators to being citizens? We also lift up the possibility of abundance in many ways, of course. This, again, theologically, when you put things together in ways that make better things happen than could be done individually by individuals or others that aren't part of that mix, you're bringing your best resources to bear, you're bringing a sense of imagination and creativity to making things happen that are really models of abundance. I would just say that this is a campus that is such a model of that. I mean, so many ways, the ways that we've entered into partnerships with other organizations, all of these different things that actually show that as we come together, we accomplish more on behalf of both institutions than we could do doing that work on our own. I think that's a very important aspect of how higher education generally is going to need to shift in the coming decades in order to respond to the kind of public criticisms for costs and just issues, again, I mean, that we owe it to the public to show them that we're thinking through new ways of doing our work in partnership with each other and with other organizations. And so we're very proud of the ways that we've lifted that up. I always talk about it this way, this openness to evolving social arrangements. So it's really about, again, different ways that things are organized and not getting stuck in, if you think about it, colleges and universities, you know, this model that we have for even places like Augsburg, but certainly places like the university, you know, those are 150-year-old ideas about how to be organized that we've not gone beyond. So how do we begin to imagine new ways of doing our work together and creating more fluid boundaries, both within the campus as well as with other organizations outside the campus? I'm then going to just this is a critical piece that I just want to mention quickly here that I think, again, kind of goes to the heart. If we're going to fight for justice, the fact is we've got to change people's perspectives, even on their experience here. I've just had the chance, over the last 24 hours, I was with my fellow private college presidents for a retreat, and we met with both the new University of Minnesota president and the new Minsku chancellor. And one of the central themes of our work is how in this state, in this great state with all of our progressive ideas about lots of different things, we have fallen into the trap of thinking about higher education as a private good instead of a public good. In some ways we've commodified, if you will, this is a transaction that we have with students. They come here and they enter into a relationship, it's a financial relationship, economic relationship, as opposed to going back to the original vision of the fact that colleges and universities offer a public good that serves the democracy, that serves society, serves the community in some fashion. And this is so critical, it seems to me, at the heart. Again, you got to get beyond that way of thinking about your own education if you're going to get students to think about justice in the ways that we're talking about here. I'm not going to... This is wonderful. I just would urge you, if you are interested in this concept more, Michael, kind of a summary of a course, a popular course that he's taught at Harvard, but he points to a different vision of justice in the common good.
I think what we're seeing in our time is the rise of what I've come to call the empty self. And by that I mean a self that, for a whole variety
Palmer,
of
just so you maybe I can't stop it. I don't know. Maybe I can stop it from here.
From within.
Yeah, I can stop it that way. So, YouTube, fabulous. You know, you can get these little 3-minute snippets about people like Parker Palmer talking about important issues. And so if you're interested, go on the website, you'll be able to watch that whole thing. But Michael Sandel has written this book on justice that points to these 4 concepts that he thinks are critical for our 21st century. So again, citizenship. So again, kind of lifting up something that we've talked about the moral limits of markets. Markets are important, but in fact, if our whole life is defined by markets, that's going to be a problem. The whole issue of inequality and how we work together, and going back to this concept of civic virtue, about how we're formed to be certain kinds of people, and then what he calls a politics of moral engagement. So really important concepts that are at the heart of how we think about our life together here on this campus. Last piece related to this vision for the colleges as anchors. And this is, again, I said this is experience that lots of people are having places like Philadelphia and Milwaukee and a lot of other major urban areas that where the higher education institutions have begun to think of themselves differently. Not as places that have all the answers that they can give to the community, but in fact places that want to enter into mutual conversation and mutual benefit for each other, for the sake of the city, for the sake of the neighborhood. This is the fundamental challenge to that. We have to overcome our own arrogance. You know, it's just the nature of the academy. I'm sorry. I mean, you know, and I've spent a lot of time trying to work with my colleagues at other institutions to really take on this issue, because it's just the character of these colleges that we think we have the answers. And so as we try to change our mindset on that, what we do is that we then engage our neighbors differently, because we engage them as as fellow citizens, as potential teachers. I heard a great story last night about a woman on our staff took out a group of students out into the neighborhood, and they were wandering around looking at different things in the neighborhood, and she happened to see a homeless man that she actually knows well because she's very connected to the neighborhood, and she called him, and his name was Chester. She said, "Chester, will you come over and talk to these students?" And she could see the fear in the students when they initially thought this was going to happen. Well, Chester came over, took off his hat, and spent 20 minutes giving them a history lesson about the neighborhood. And all of these students learned something from a new member of our faculty. Think about that. That's what that is, that openness to being taught differently. So this is really fundamental as this piece, again, seeing the neighborhood as classroom, particularly this comes down to some economic issues about how we think differently about our, what I call economic mutuality. So what is our well-being as a college, as an economic engine in this neighborhood alongside of the university and Fairview Hospital and the businesses down the street, and how do we take responsibility for that and name that? In particular, this moving away from a charity model of our relationships with the neighborhood, so that it's not what we can do for them always, but in fact what we can do together, is a part of this anchor movement. Some very practical strategies that go into this. People, that is how we share people, and that's a big part of what we do. As you can't miss on this campus, we won the President's Award for Community Service. Yay! You know, one of the facts in that, when that was announced, was that we offered 225,000 hours of community service last year. That's unbelievable, and that's people on this campus, students, faculty, staff, giving to the community in very varied ways. But people are a big piece of this. How we purchase, how we support a local economy, how we claim our place here, and how we think about this place and take care of it and have pride in it. And that's as those of you who know Augsburg, that's been a real important commitment, especially over the past 15 years, and this is a very different place than it was 20, 25 years ago, and that's important. It's also in these partnerships and alliances that I talked about, so very practical strategies that point to how we do this work. And then the final piece of this vision is how we love the world, so and how we look for what God's plan is for our lives. So right back to that notion of what our vocation is as a college and how we are always looking to discern that. Just here 4 simple little quotes that I've been using a lot to kind of lift up. This is this wonderful passage. It's actually from a oratorial written by Lawrence Siegel called Kaddish, the Jewish prayers for morning. Words that came from Rabbi Nachman in Breslau. Nothing is as whole as a heart that has been broken. All time is made up of healing of the world. Return to your ships, which are your broken bodies. Return to your ships, which have been rebuilt. This is actually the text that I used for my 9/11, my 9/11 homily in chapel on Monday, to remind people again that this work of healing the world is at the heart of this. That's God's plan. We've been called to heal the world. Another quote that we use a lot here is from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Again, this notion that it's only by living completely in the world that we learn to have faith. And this commitment to the world that is so real here. In fact, I remember in the mission conversations with faculty in particular, that just a real focus on how, yes, it's informed citizens, it's thoughtful stewards, critical thinkers, responsible leaders, but it's for the world. It's for the world that we educate these students. That's really what we have to keep in mind. This lovely little passage from Teresa of Avila, we are the only body of Christ on earth now. How about that? That kind of gets to the point. So if in fact the Word became flesh, we're it now. You know, we are living that out and illustrating that in how we live out our faith in the world. And then finally, this passage from Reinhold Niebuhr that is so powerful and works for so many different audiences as an important statement of remembering again that horizon to our work. Nothing worth doing is completed in our lifetime. Therefore, we're saved by hope. Nothing true or beautiful or good makes complete sense in any immediate context of history. Therefore, we're saved by faith. Nothing we do, however virtuous, can be accomplished alone. Therefore, we're saved by love. No virtuous act is quite as virtuous from the standpoint of our friend or foe as from our own. Therefore, we are saved by the final form of love, which is forgiveness. And that takes us all the way back to this mission, which is what grounds us in this vision for the kind of education that we offer here, for the kind of community that we're trying to create, for the kind of impact that we're trying to have on the world with the work that we do here. And I just say that I'm proud to be a partner in that work with faculty members and staff members and regents and other leaders and alums of this college who care deeply about a college that is really living into this vision. This, you know, I didn't have to make this up. That's the power of this. This is this college. And my job, as it always been, is to, I hope, bring some articulation of that work to bear. So that sets a framework, I think an important framework. We are a college, that's important. We're not a social service agency, we're not a church, we are a college, but we are an expression of our Lutheran Christian faith. And that's the important claim we make. And then the work we do in that context as it connects to other expressions of the faith is really the critical steps that we're taking together. And we value that work together with you. So I'm now going to turn it to Tom, who's going to bring in just a few examples of what we're doing. We're going to toggle off here so that we can hook up the new